Maybe you did, and maybe you didn't watch President Biden's speech tonight in Philadelphia. I watched it, so you don't have to. You're welcome. I love you. I swear, I do. Welcome to the show, everybody. Presented by Americans for Prosperity, Americans for Prosperity dot org. The president is allowed to give a speech anytime the president wants to give a speech. This speech was not a well-delivered one, nor was it a well-thought-out one. Noah Rothman of Commentary Magazine said it very well like that. I'm paraphrasing in his tweet. Was not thought out, was poorly executed. I think that's incredibly true. But the question, of course, is why? What was the problem with this speech where President Biden was trying to engage this idea of the soul of the nation? Now, to understand why that soul part is so incredibly important, you have to go back to his inauguration, where he said that unifying the country was in, and I'm quoting here, his whole soul. Unifying a country is not about a country having total agreement on all things. Unifying a country is about the idea that you might disagree, but it doesn't mean that the other side is fascists. It doesn't mean that the other side is bigots. But we, of course, have lived in the real world, the real United States, where disagreement, you've been called a racist and a bigot or a terrorist or Lord only knows what else. And this has been going on not for days, not for weeks, not for months, not since Donald John Trump, but this has been going on for decades, where your disagreement with something, casual or intense, has been viewed as, well, you're just a Nazi. As a matter of fact, we saw a whole group, Antifa, which I believe it was Biden who said it didn't really exist, just an idea. Punch a Nazi. You disagree with me, you're a Nazi. Engage in violence against police officers, against property and property rights, against Americans. Happily punch a Nazi was, dear Lord, their theme. So if you're going to engage a conversation about the soul, you have to start with understanding what very well is the soul. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. The Constitution is the soul. Right? The Declaration of Independence, as explained once to me by Bill Whittle, the Declaration is the why of America. Why is it that we are doing this, creating this country, when in the course of human events? The conversation about dissolving the ties between us and compelling ourselves to say these are the reasons why we're doing so. We declare that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's the why of America. The Constitution is the how we go about doing these things. It is the rules by which we live, the rules of our not democracy, but our republic. It's very hard to think that you can connect with the idea of the soul of the nation if you don't acknowledge that our conversation is not one of democracy, because a conversation about democracy gets into a conversation of mob rule. You could argue that the president and Joe Biden is just using democracy as this catch-all, but he only mentioned republic once in his entire speech. Democracy is at stake. Democracy is at risk. And he gave certain examples to this before I get into his full-on attack on MAGA Republicans. He talked about how wrong it is not to accept election results. I think he's absolutely right about that. And I certainly hope that Hillary Clinton and Stacey Abrams were listening, because he has members of his own party who did not accept election results. Jamie Raskin, the congressman from Maryland, and many others wanted to challenge the election results in 2017 when Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. They were there on their January 6th saying, we want to challenge. There's nothing wrong with a challenge at all. If there is a path to do so, a legal path to do so, you can engage it. But Stacey Abrams and Hillary Clinton did not accept election results. Stacey Abrams flat out refused to accept the fact that Brian Kemp was elected governor of Georgia, and Hillary Clinton told us Russia Russia, Russia. How can one possibly think they can connect to the idea of the soul of the nation if they will not look inward? The very concept of soul searching involves the self and one's own soul. He didn't do that in this speech. He didn't even try to do that in this speech. He gave a speech that rambled. He gave a speech that meandered and then repeated itself in its rambling and meandering all over again. And then, because twice wasn't enough, he did it again. Hitting on themes that he has been giving for the past 6 months, he 3 times, thrice, as the kids would say, repeated himself. Not sharing anything new, not showing that he had a connection, not showing that he understood that America might not agree with him on all things, that there may actually be an opposition. He did recognize the fact that indeed our politics are there to mediate those disagreements. That much is true. That much is accurate. But if you're going to argue that accepting election results is the bedrock, and you don't recognize those in your own party who didn't do it, and those in that party who supported those who refused to do it, joyfully and gleefully, they go along with Stacey Abrams, who won't accept the election result, and if she should lose this time in Georgia, won't accept the election result, one would only assume, based on her history. And Hillary Clinton, who said everything about the election except for, yeah, I was a bad candidate. Yeah, I didn't know how to connect to the people in Michigan. I took those people for granted. Never mind voters all across the country. Joe Biden wants to engage a conversation of the soul and made his entire list of talking points about MAGA Republicans. Now, I must tell you that I don't know what a MAGA Republican is. I know what Republicans are. And I voted for President Trump twice. When I first voted for President Trump in 2016, I actually wrote about this. I wrote an open letter to my kids. It was the first time I ever referenced my children in print. I'm a pretty private cat about my kids. And what I wrote to them was that Donald Trump wasn't my guy. In the primaries, he wasn't my guy, but he was the nominee. Remember, there were people who were absolutely on the Trump train. I was never Trump. I never understood never Trump. You want to talk about a non-conservative point of view? Never Trump. Never communism, I get. Never Trump. You didn't know what this guy was going to give you. You had no idea what this guy was going to do. How could you be never Trump? And so knowing that to be true and knowing that it wasn't a conservative position as I saw it to take a never Trump position, I said, well, what am I actually looking at here? And what I came to the conclusion of was that, you know what? I have a 50-50 shot with Trump. This was my take in 2016. I've got a 50-50 shot to get some of what I want policy-wise with Trump because I'm never voting for the cult of personality. I'm voting for what it is that I get. You want to call it selfish? I'm fine with that. I want what I want. I want what's best for the country. I want to be able to live a free life the way I see fit to the moment of my happiness without the concept of acceptance. I don't need other people to approve of what I do. As long as I'm not hurting anybody else, or as long as I'm not breaking the law, leave me be. This is what I want. Who will best help me get to that place for me where I'm left alone? With Trump, I felt I had a 50-50 shot. With Hillary Clinton, I had 0 shot. I knew what I was going to get with Hillary Clinton. Nothing. So I wrote this letter, published this letter, and said, kids, this is why I'm doing it. I'm voting for Trump. And I really hope it works out. And policy-wise, I believe it did. Personality-wise, it wouldn't have worked out with Hillary Clinton either. Although I got to admit, not everything about Trump's personality drives me crazy. Plenty of things do, however. And I differ with a lot of my contemporaries on these subjects, and I think that that's absolutely fine. I may differ with you on some of these things, and that's also absolutely fine. And when 2020 came, I looked at the same criteria, and I voted for Donald Trump again. The people who voted for Donald Trump aren't fascists. Riots are wrong. I absolutely agree with the fact that riots are wrong, and January 6th was indeed a riot. It was not an insurrection, nor was it incitement to insurrection. Joe Biden just the other day said if you want to take on a country, you need F-15s. Guns won't cut it. So how in the world was January 6th an overthrow of America? None of them had an F-15. The president's own words, in my view, could very well be used as the defense that a lot of these people use to say, insurrection, what are you talking about? None of us had planes. I wonder whether or not that's going to be utilized as a defense. But I don't defend rioting. Yet there was Joe Biden talking about the soul of America and talking about January 6th. When he and his party were silent during the riots that took place in Minneapolis, in Seattle, and in Portland, where people died. In my beloved Indianapolis, 2 people died in 2 nights of rioting. Indianapolis did not suffer the way many other cities suffered, as they did for weeks and months and years. But banks were set on fire. Dumpsters were set on fire and rolled down the streets. I went downtown Indianapolis the next day to record the carnage, the broken windows. People were volunteering who brought their kids and brought trash bags and brooms to clean up. That is the soul of the nation. The rioting was not. And if the president wants to decry rioting, I'm with him, but it has to be all of the rioting. And Joe Biden did not do that in this speech. How possibly could he have a connection to the soul of America? The problems with this speech abound. But there is no problem greater than the fact that the president wanted it to go one way, as opposed to addressing what ails the nation. It is a problem so glaring in this speech, so absolutely glaring, so right there on the surface, that anything else said simply doesn't matter. Now, the speech had some other issues, and one that absolutely has to be addressed and questions to be asked of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, and the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. That man was flanked by 2 Marines while he spoke at a podium with the seal of the President of the United States and engaged a political speech where he went about attacking fellow citizens of the United States. We allow such a thing? That is going to fly? Not at all. That is deserving of your derision. The speech was deserving of your dismay, because that speech was not about uniting a nation, nor was it about the soul. It was divisive. It was ugly. It was rambling and meandering, as I stated, and most importantly, it missed every mark and connected only with those people in the mainstream media or the Democratic Party, depending on how you like to say these things, who want this election coming up in November to be about Donald Trump, who want everything to be about Donald Trump, and there should be no escape from Donald Trump. This is now where we're at. What is going to be our response? There's an idea that Republicans can't take the bait. And this is predicated on the idea that we saw the raid happen in Mar-a-Lago, and look at all the people defending Donald Trump, but they don't know actually what happened. And what if Donald Trump indeed had documents that he wasn't supposed to have? I made the argument on my radio shows, and I've made it here, that when you take a look at a warrant from the FBI that states in the writing that they are looking for fruits of crime, that does not seem to me to comport with the Fourth Amendment that discusses that you will list out the places to be searched and the items to be seized. I don't even know how we could think that this warrant had value. Not that maybe President Trump had documents he shouldn't have, but how does a warrant that says fruits of crime fit anything we think of as Americans? Joe Biden wants to tell us that we have to be people who follow the law. The rule of law matters. I wholeheartedly agree. But when he tells us that you have some people who are pushing the idea of violence, it was Speaker Pelosi who said, I'm surprised people aren't taking to the streets. Maybe they will during the last couple of years. It was Ayanna Pressley that said people have to stay in the streets and fight, the representative from Massachusetts. It was Representative Maxine Waters who stated when you see a Trump official, you gather around them, you make a crowd, you get a crowd, and you push back on them and you tell them they are not welcome. It was Sarah Huckabee Sanders who was thrown out of restaurants. It was Mitch McConnell who was chased out of a restaurant. It was Justice Brett Kavanaugh who had his life threatened when someone came to his home trying to kill him. And the president of the United States offered no security and no help and said nothing. Yet he comes to you tonight to say the soul of the nation is at risk. You cannot save the soul of the nation if you don't actually respect it. The whole of the nation, people who agree and people who disagree with you. If you aren't willing to recognize the problems in toto, in full, how could you possibly solve them? To lay it at the feet of MAGA Republicans. This was a political speech. And there are people who argue that the defense of Trump after the raid has actually created a problem and cost political capital because, well, what if Trump had documents he shouldn't have? It's an interesting conversation. I don't quite know if I buy it as a destruction of the political capital. But I do think there is something rather important to the idea of how we respond to this speech. And I think we respond to the speech by discussing what we believe the soul of the nation to be. I don't have to say anything more than the speech was rambling and divisive. And President Biden refused to look at himself. If he's not looking at his own soul, how in the world could he fix the soul of the nation? If we want to ask ourselves, how do you go about obtaining a victory in November? And the we are the people who are exhausted by Biden policies, exhausted by the puritanical view of the Democratic Party that says you have to agree with us, otherwise you're fascists. Well, we have to do it by reminding ourselves what is actually important. The New York Times reported that there are people who are utilizing buy now, pay later services to buy food. Food prices are up 13.1% year over year because of inflation. Gas isn't $5 a gallon anymore. It's $4 a gallon, still $2 too high, and still affecting everyday lives. Energy costs are flat out through the roof. Electricity and water, I'm getting emails about that all the time. This is going to be a very rough winter for people where they're going to have to decide between heating their homes and eating. We've got companies laying people off left and right, and the president told us today that the economy is roaring back. Bed Bath & Beyond closing stores, eliminating 20% of the workforce. Walmart and a host of Fortune 500 companies laying people off. Companies are rescinding job offers. They're engaging hiring freezes. You want to talk about low unemployment? I love low unemployment. But we aren't a healthy economy. We aren't in a good place. And recognizing that and offering up the solutions to that, which involve less spending to bring down the inflation as the Fed raises interest rates, is a great place to start. This is what we have to do because of what Biden has done. This is what the math tells us. Discussing that we don't have to live in a world where we're told there's only one acceptable way to think. That is a smart approach. A smart approach is recognizing that we never had to close the schools. And when Joe Biden talks about schools being open, they never had to be closed. But it was because he listened to these unions, like people like Randy Weingarten and others, that children were affected and damaged. And we can fix this by ensuring we don't ever allow a virus to decide that it somehow means our kids must further suffer. People respond to positives. They respond to a plan. They respond to the idea that things can be better if X, then Y. They don't actually respond to anger and to hate. They don't engage and enjoy it. I'm not saying that some people don't. We clearly see what has happened in America. But the vast swath, the vast majority of we, the people, the soul of America, want something to aspire to, want a plan that allows them to live, to be able to feed their family, to be able to send their kids to school without fear that their children are going to be indoctrinated. Talk about those things. Don't scream and yell at Biden. Talk to Americans about the actual soul of the country, which is them, and how these policies make your life better because you have the freedom to make choices for yourself. If anything, prices will come down and you'll be able to afford to go out to dinner again. The problem with Joe Biden's speech is that if you're not willing to engage the whole soul, you can't talk about the soul. The problem that the rest of us may have is the response to this speech could very well dictate how the 2022 midterms work out. Joe Biden did himself no favors, as I see it. The only favor he could be given is if the Republican Party is actually willing to throw fire on the fire, as opposed to utilizing the moment to say, he does not understand the soul. The soul's the people. Here's what the people are saying. Here's what they need. And here is how to get there. Let me go to the comments. Guys, good to be with you. Why was he yelling at a crowd of dozens? He was yelling. I mean, a lot of yelling. Biden, he doesn't have some of the connective tissue that I thought he would have. I once argued that the one thing Biden could do that Trump couldn't do was he could go full grandfatherly, right? Kind of wrap you in the embrace, bring it softer. But the softer has turned to this weird whispering thing that he does. And this speech was yelling anger. If you ask me, did it connect? Oh, gosh, no. Oh, gosh, absolutely, positively no. And it's because he came across as angry. Biden is a racist. Come on, let's focus. I will say this. Biden does say a lot of things that where if it was a Republican, MSNBC would be on it 24/7, 365. The grand old party is dead. The GOP is dead. Maybe, or maybe they have a chance to engage in a revival. You know, if you're asking me, I'm not a Republican, I'm a conservative. And I do believe that there is a difference because my views, my philosophy, my theory is based on study. It's based on readings. It's based on research. And I find that to be a much better way because it allows me a place, a foundation by which to engage conversation. I have often referred to the Republican Party as the party of stupid because these are the people who can snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory like nobody's business, which is why I'm trying to give them some practical advice about how to go forward post this speech, which I believe gave the Republican Party an absolutely tremendous amount of opportunity. Because Biden's speech was angry. Courtney, he did seem angry. He always seems angry. Now, if you go back in Biden's history, in how he treated Clarence Thomas, if you go back in history to how he has engaged people on the campaign trail, angry, elitist, snobbish, brutish, rude. That's who he is. Now, this from Ray, this is not dismissive. Ray, you are not the only person talking about this. Holy cow, the stagecraft. If you didn't see the speech, I have this weird hair sticking out right here. I apologize. Biden, it was a dark scene. It wasn't bright. It wasn't light. It wasn't American flags. It was dark with these red. Were they drapes or were they lights? So I was actually listening on my phone through my car because I was driving back from an event. So I only caught a little bit of the visual, but it was like these red lights, drapes that came down on the sides. And it was very V for Vendetta, dark and eerie and gloomy. It wasn't bright and fanfare and America, F yeah, none of that. It was it the scene matched his anger. And that is not a smart approach. Not a smart approach at all. Now, Cody, hey, Cody. Unfortunately, I feel that many have lost faith in election integrity. I hope and pray droves come out to the ballot boxes. This would be something to address when addressing the soul of the nation. People are concerned. People have lost faith. When you talk about, as President Biden did, you have members of Congress and members of the MAGA Republicans going after FBI agents, and FBI agents are being threatened by their fellow citizens. I don't want anybody threatened. I don't want anybody threatened at all. I've never understood the concept. It is ridiculous. Death threats are ridiculous. But does Joe Biden not understand that the lack of faith that many Americans have in the FBI come from the fact that you told us that Trump was engaged with the Russians and it didn't happen? And Andrew McCabe had to leave the FBI because he lied to fellow FBI agents who were under his charge. Then you had Peter Strzok and Lisa Page who were texting each other about having insurance policies against Trump. Is this who we are? Of course not. Why not be enraged by that? Because it is indeed enraging. FBI members, according to Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, have come to him as whistleblowers. And this week, Merrick Garland sent a letter to FBI agents reminding them to limit their conversations with members of Congress, which I took as saying, hey, you don't get to be whistleblowers. Don't you be talking about what happens here. Very odd stuff. Very dangerous stuff. And mostly dangerous because if you don't understand, there are Americans who don't have faith in the institutions right now because of what the institutions have done. I'm supposed to have faith in the IRS. The IRS during the President Obama administration utilized itself as a cudgel against free speech by preventing Tea Party groups from getting a tax-exempt status so they could engage their ability to speak. This happened not from some low-level Cincinnati perfunctory, but from Lois Lerner at the very top. It's hard to have the nation united when there isn't faith in the institutions. And what is Joe Biden going to do about returning faith to the institutions? Something that the Republicans should be talking about. Because the faith isn't there. And it's not just Republicans who have lost that faith. That is a legitimate point that you made there, Cody, and I greatly appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the breakdown. That was my take on it, and I'll have more on this 6 a.m. My radio show on WIBC 93.1 FM, and then of course noon to 3 as well. WIBC.com. There's an unbelievable opportunity politically that came out of this speech. But if I've learned anything about Joe Biden, and I've learned much about Joe Biden, it's that it's very obvious that the problem that he has with this Soul of America speech is that he never once really sought to understand it, never once looked into himself, never once acknowledged that the real divisions also are taking place in his party. And it was a bit of hysterical to see him engage these conversations without looking inward and at his own party. It's hard to engage a conversation about the soul when you won't be honest about the problem. Glad you guys were here, and my thanks to Americans for Prosperity, americansforprosperity.org. Free speech matters, economic freedom matters. They're down with it, and I'm thrilled that I get to work with them, and they support this show. It is pretty awesome. Share this video everywhere. Subscribe on Rumble. I would appreciate it if you shared it. I really and truly would. I will catch you tomorrow, guys. Take care.